many people consider to be one of the greatest collections of war poetry ever written. He was quite a young man, and he went on to write some very famous poems, which are still often heard today. And some of them are extremely vivid in their expressions and in their use of words. He wrote, "Out there we've walked quite friendly up to death, sat down eaten with him, cool and bland, pardoned his spilling mess tins in our hand. We've sniffed the green, thick odour of his breath. Our eyes wept, but our courage didn't writhe. He spattered us with bullets and his cough shrapnel. We chorused when he sang aloft. We whistled while he shaved us with his scythe." There's something incredibly expressive about those lines, I always think. You get a real sense of a sort of innocence of the people going to war, and how they were brought up face to face with something they couldn't have imagined and couldn't have expected, and they had no other way of really coming to terms with it. The First World War in particular produced a whole generation of famous poets and a lot of famous literature. But most of the people who wrote it either died young or went mad and never really recovered. I don't think any of them were prepared for the horror of war. They were never really prepared for what they came up against, and they could never really come to terms with it. And it affected a whole generation, a generation of doomed youth, as it's sometimes called, that was kind of wiped out. And people never really recovered from it. We hear a lot about the civilian casualties of war and trouble that wars can cause, but one of the things we tend to forget is just how young and innocent so many of the people fighting wars really are. People on the front line are often nothing more than teenagers. And I know from having worked with them that a lot of them are quite cheerful and quite innocent and quite young, but not necessarily always very well emotionally prepared for some of the things that they might have to face later. And so you get this sort of overwhelming sense of tragedy that comes over people when a whole generation is lost like that. And it produced a whole civilization, a whole culture, which hopefully these days is more aware and more dedicated to keeping peace. These days, war can easily spill over into what they call total war. It's not only the soldiers who suffer, but whole civilizations, including huge numbers of civilian casualties. War has become more and more horrible. So I think more than ever it's important to make sure that there are no more wars. These young people who died in world wars did so because they wanted to put an end to war. They wanted to stop war, they wanted to stop the killing, they wanted to stop all the nastiness in the world, and they believed they were dying in order to build a new world, a better world, and to bring about everlasting peace. And so we owe it to them not to forget their sacrifice and not to forget their efforts. We have to remember so that others don't go down the same path. We have to remember so that younger people will have some concept of what's going on, some concept of what's involved, of the human cost involved and of the price that needs to be paid, so that people don't, hopefully, have belittling attitudes towards other peoples and other nations and those with whom they disagree. The best way to make sure there are no more wars is for us to build a new world, a better world. Show by example, rather than simply talking at youngsters who won't always be listening. We're better off building a new world. Hopefully we'll be able to build a world based on acceptance of others, based on a real desire for peace, a world that is not judgmental, a world that is tolerant, a world where people are accepted for what they are, a world where people make a genuine effort to live in peace together. And sometimes it's not easy and does involve a real effort to get on with people. But we owe it to those who died young, so young. We owe it to them to make this effort, to build